And there's so many aspects of this journey that have been scary, just as so many of the great things that I have done, and I say great in the context of what they've meant for me or how I've grown through them, have been things that when I first thought about them, or when I thought to speak them out loud, would make me feel like you are, like roller coaster style, when you're feeling your stomach rising up through your throat, I think that's a healthy feeling. And I think a lot of us have desensitized from what it's like to feel that. Because when we think about fear, we think about jumping out of a plane or going swimming with sharks or something like that. And we don't actually think about the moments we stop ourselves. And if we can resensitize to those moments where we don't lean in and we can choose to do that, this whole book is based on choosing to do the next brave thing over and over and over.
Welcome to Freedom Matters, where we explore the intersection of technology, productivity and digital well-being. I'm your host, Georgie Powell, and each episode we'll be talking to experts in productivity and digital wellness. We'll be sharing their personal stories and experience on how to take back control of technology. We hope you leave feeling inspired, so let's get to it. This week, I'm in conversation with Holly Ransom. Holly is a globally renowned content curator, speaker and master questioner, with the belief that if you walk past it, you tell the world it's okay. Named one of Australia's 100 most influential women by the Australian Financial Review, she has delivered a peace charter to the Dalai Lama, was Sir Richard Branson's nominee for Wired magazine's Smart List, and awarded the US Embassy's Eleanor Roosevelt Award for Leadership Excellence in 2019. Holly has interviewed the likes of Barack Obama, Malcolm Gladwell, Richard Branson, Billie Jean King, Condoleezza Rice, and the world's first humanoid robot, Sophia. And in her recently released book, The Leading Edge, Holly helps people harness their own potential to lead by asking better questions, thinking beyond biased answers, and building collective momentum for change. Today we'll be discussing why fear is a game changer, how leaders think about technology, and just how the policy landscape needs to get match fit for 21st century technology. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Freedom Matters podcast. It's absolutely fabulous to have you here as a guest.
It's so great to be here and so great to reconnect after so many years.
I know. We were just having a lovely preamble talking about how 5 years, it's such a short period of time, but so much can happen.
Oh, it feels like an eternity in this modern age, doesn't it, when you think about the time vortex we've all been in over the last year, 18 months. And this is the woman responsible for me getting through an Ironman. So I have a lot of debt to you, Georgie. You hadn't inspired me and connected me with a coach, I don't think I ever would have crossed that finishing line. So that's where our tale begins.
Indeed. I remember when we first met, you were challenging yourself to be fearful every day. And I remember thinking that is just such an amazing thing to do.
Hence why I signed up for an Ironman. That was a very, I always say to people, that was not one fear, that was about 40 of my fears in terms of the showing up every day and the challenge and the pushing yourself and everything like that. So that was part of that year of fear that we did, sort of 365 days of doing it back to back. So yes, it was crazy. But if it weren't for the very smart intervention saying, you know what you need, you should really think about a coach. I don't think the ambitious vision I had for basically doing an Ironman off the couch would have been anywhere come close to being possible. So I'm very grateful for that.
On her journey to embrace something that made her fearful every day, Holly applied and won a Fulbright scholarship to study the Masters in Public Policy at Harvard. She went in with a belief that global leadership is not, in her words, match fit for the challenges that we face, such as climate change, which needs global collaboration. But how to regulate technology, particularly AI and data management, was also a big part of the course. For Holly, reimagining a better way to govern will require us all to ask the right questions.
You were delving into issues that really haven't had to be solved for previously, whether we were thinking about countries like India, where they're moving to digitise their entire citizenry, and what that means and the social consequences of technology changes like that, whether we're thinking about digital rights in the context of GDPR, and then my thesis was around digital rights in the Australian context by comparison, looking at that from a consumer rights standpoint. We've got countries with different approaches, we've got countries with different content, with fundamentally different structures and how they're looking at that, and none of that is bad or good, it is. One of the ladies I interviewed for my book, who's an incredible thinker in this space, is a lady by the name of Dr. Genevieve Bell. And she was an anthropologist who then ended up as a vice president at Intel and was really part of the first UX and human design movement in the world of technology. And she tells the story that we misrepresent AI when we talk about it like it's something that just originated. In realities, it started in conferences in the 60s, where the fundamental problem was thinking about how to wage war against the Soviets. And the people in the room designing the solution were overwhelmingly white men coming from a scientific or academic background. And, she challenges you to think about the better questions we need to be asking now. History doesn't give it answers, it gives us better questions. And I love that, because her point is, who was not in that room? Who was that designing for? What were the intended outcomes? And if we're architecting on that foundation, what does that mean we're missing, we're perpetuating, we're doing that might not be the direction that we want to head in? And so I think for me, the overwhelming takeaway from the degree was about the importance of each of us playing an active role in finding a way to influence those conversations, and the criticality of the questions that we're asking, and making sure that the way that we design technology is not by default, that we have opinions on it.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. And I love in the book how it's kind of bigger than just this conversation around responsible technology, but you basically say, if you walk past something, you accept it. And that made me really think about how we use tech every day, because we walk past it, we just click accept, and on we go. And so few of us have learned how to say, actually, I have challenges with this, or I don't understand it. So how do we do that? How do we get more people to ask more questions about the way the technology that they're using every day may be impacting their lives?
Well, I think, for example, the podcast that you're running, I love the fact that you've set something up here to make us be more intentionally curious about the way technology impacts on our lives and the way that we engage with it. Listening to a podcast like this, where you're interacting with a whole array of experts across the spectrum that can help people think through whether it's the apps they're using, whether it's the devices themselves, whether it's the companies that they're choosing to buy shares in, who knows what. There's so many different ways of either showing support or showing our disagreement with the direction of something. You don't need to become an expert in coding. You don't need to become a technology wizard, but each of us needs to find a way to become literate enough in technology that we can engage in the conversations that concern us. Whether you're defining that in terms of your personal remit and world, the things that we use on these devices, whether you're comfortable with the way that your data is shared, with third-party agreements and how that's on-shared, whether you're wanting to support ethically the stances of some of the organisations that you have the app or technology of. They're choices we can make at a personal level. And then obviously part of the conversation I have a lot with CEOs and boards is around making sure we understand the technology that we're operating on and the decisions we're making on that. I think that's where there's a huge argument for greater diversity on boards and more intergenerational diversity. It's important we've got digital natives involved in these conversations. People who deeply understand or are familiar with the business models or have spent time working closer to them or thinking about these challenges. But I think the important thing I'd stress to your point around not walking past it is we can't afford to be passengers on this. Because if we continue to let other people make decisions, I can tell you by virtue of the way that interest is currently controlled, the decisions are being made for us and you may not like them. There's a lot of people now that I think already wish that we'd asked some more critical questions earlier of some of the major technology companies in the world. So let's not be saying that in 10 years' time. Let's take that responsibility on of going, okay, we're here now. That is what it is. But how do we move forward, to your point, with a greater level of focus to how technology is impacting us and making a values judgment on what we want that to look like?
You obviously work a lot with CEOs and leaders of big companies around the world, and most companies now are technology companies of some kind of another, right? Totally. How often do you hear boardroom conversations about, are we making the right technology decisions from a user point of view, from a responsibility or an ethical point of view, over the importance of continuing to generate profit? Because we know currently that there is that conflict in the way that the business models of many of these organisations are operating.
Obviously, that's one question set that you could ask of a technology company itself. A lot more of the companies I deal with are probably those that are using the technology as part of their operational model, or they're buying the platform, they're building on it, whatever it might be. And so I think the thing that always strikes me there is probably the absence of those questions above anything. I think it's fantastic that we're seeing organisations thinking about having AI ethicists, organisations thinking about having people that are in charge of thinking through data in a really deep and meaningful way. What are we doing? What are rights? How do we protect privacy? What's our policy? But I would say that's still the exception to the rule. And so I think that importance of making sure that we are fostering more of those conversations is absolutely critical, because I think it's actually that those questions aren't being asked. We're asking, does this solve the challenge, that's immediately in front of us? Does this allow us to communicate to our customers? Does this allow us to scale up and be in that market in, 6 months? But I still think all too often we're not asking ourselves some of those fundamental questions underneath.
And then coming back to the public policy part again, what's your view? How do we get policy ahead of the rate at which technology is developing and evolving?
It's interesting. I remember having this conversation with David Eves, who's an incredible professor at Harvard and just a brilliant thinker in this space, and has been very influential, not just with the Canadian government, but a number of countries. But he really challenged me when I asked him a similar question on that. And he said, I challenge you as to whether or not you want an elephant that can move as nimbly as a mouse. And I love that. And it's something that's really stuck with me. There's an inherent benefit to the fact that government is slow and moving. We actually don't want government necessarily to be as quick as technology. There's a whole range of unintended negative consequences and externalities. I think there's a certain degree to which things have to be allowed to form before we can fully conceptualize their impact on society, and therefore make determinations around what we might need to do from an economic policy setting, from a protection setting, privacy setting, you name it. I'm really passionate that we drive more technology literacy amongst our policy. I think it's inherently problematic that we are as far behind in a lot of instances. You see leading like countries, you often hear Estonia talked about, what the EU did with GDPR was certainly the most significant digital rights demonstration of the time. So you see these little case studies and examples. But on the whole, I would say most of the world's playing catch up and most of the responses are quite piecemeal. And I think the thing that we're probably seeing a shift towards now in public policy is governments getting their head around what might a purpose-built institution look like. What might it be if we housed capability and built an institution that was designed to do, AI, data, technology, policy for us, and think about a whole country, whole society, whole of economy view on some of these sorts of things. As opposed to the idea that as every department interfaces with some aspect of the challenge, they're all coming at it from a different lens and we end up with a patchwork that doesn't knit together. Because that's inherently problematic when you know this world better than I do as someone who's worked in technology all your life. That's the challenge of the legacy system, right? The more that we do that, the more that we bolt things on and try and make it all fit together, the more we hand over a challenge to the next person who comes to the role who's going, you did what? How's this work? So I think that's one of the challenges for us from a public policy standpoint.
Yeah, how do we start to think much more systematically rather than
totally
in the whack-a-mole approach? Yeah, I get that. That makes a lot of sense.
Just the other thing I'd say on that is that I think the other thing too is the cross-pollination of professionals. I think it's really important we get more technologists doing policy, and I think it's really important that we get more policymakers getting hands-on with technology.
Yeah. Of the plethora of leaders that Holly has interviewed, I was interested to understand, did they have a common approach to technology? And if so, what can we learn?
I think one of the things that's interesting, predominantly still with the generation that we're talking about as leaders, they are not digital natives. So they're not people that have grown up with devices attached to them. And that has some both good and bad consequences, right? Like we talked about before, that doesn't mean everyone necessarily is as tech literate as perhaps the world needs them to be with some of the challenges that are before us. But one of the things that does do is it means they're not lost in the vortex in the way sometimes I think it's very easy to be as a digital native generation member, where it's sort of, if it didn't happen on a social platform, did it really happen? And I know I talk about this in the book, is this notion of managing your energy, not your time. If we talk about the idea, you think about the optimal state to run an organization, you think about the optimal state to get high performance out of yourself. You are not going to be surrounding yourself with garbage in order to do that, whether that's garbage into your body in terms of the food you put in, whether that's deciding you're going to try and do your best work next to, some smouldering pile of rubbish, whatever it might be. That's not the situation that's going to produce the best of you. And the thing that they are curious about is how we let ourselves do that with our social environment in the digital world that we play in. We don't consciously curate necessarily the energy, the tone, the time that we lose. So I think there's massive ramifications on the switching cost, because a lot of us let our days be interrupted by whenever a notification pings or whenever something pushes through. So that's a big one that I think most leaders that I know, and I know you've interviewed the likes of Cal Newport and others, they're very good at deep focus. when they're in something, they're present. They're not the leaders that you see sitting at tables, letting notifications ping and looking at their phones while someone's presenting. They are there listening to what's being talked about, or they are deep in their reading, or they are in the doing. And so I think that discipline around how we kind of batch or when we choose to engage, and choosing to engage on our terms, is one thing. Then I think the second thing is that nature of what we are engaging with when we are. Like, if you are going to surround yourself with vitriolic bile, and let the toxicity of what can take place behind anonymous handles online invade your day, you can bet your bottom dollar you're taking some of that on. As good as your filters are, you cannot be a passive voyeur to that world. Some of that's going to seep in. It's going to change your mood. So, you can absolutely curate your digital world thoughtfully. There's a lot of people that I follow who make me more curious, who energize me, who absolutely inspire me. It's the reason I go, yep, I want to follow that, and I want that to populate my feed when I do. But I think they're probably two of the big things that I observe from leaders, is that real intentionality around their relationship. They control it. The technology doesn't control them. And they're also really mindful of the content of that when it does come in.
Across many episodes, the challenges of corporate culture, burnout, and how to build best working practices has been discussed. I was interested to ask Holly, how can we take what we've learned about productivity and great work from the leaders she knows and use it to change corporate culture?
Great question. And I completely agree with you. And I think that's why you see organisations like the World Economic Forum calling out burnout for the enormous challenge that it is. The way that we're working is killing us. It is causing overwhelming harm to us, be that in a mental wellbeing sense, in terms of it takes one report of Gallup to look at in terms of the level of disengagement, right the way through to just what we know that the sedentary lifestyle of being stuck on Zoom every day is doing to us. The first thing I'd say is each of us has choice. And one of the things I found really encouraging about the research in this area that challenged my existing thinking was this whole absolute treasure trove of research regarding micro breaks, and the notion that it can be as simple as 10 deep breaths, as getting up and doing jumping jacks, as going for a walk around the block in between meetings, and you can see positive physiological changes. And so that notion that even in amongst that structure that might be very hard for us to move, certainly in the short term, we've still got the ability to make micro choices that can help shift our world and the way that we engage with it for the better. So I think that's one area I'd say to begin with, is taking those building blocks of our day, little choices that we can make can provide a surprisingly positive benefit. I think the second thing, and I've worked in a lot of these corporate environments, it's very challenging and the cultures are all very different, but is finding a way to demonstrate the benefit of doing things differently. We're in an age of knowledge economy. The age of driving X number of hours at the factory produces more widgets is long gone. That stuff's been automated because it can. If we can standardize it, we can automate it. So we're in a world where, and this is everything you see in the World Economic Forum reports around what skills and everything matter more, it's creativity, it's empathy, right? And they require a fundamentally different set of environmental factors. You can't just go be creative, Georgie. You know what I mean? You need to be in the headspace to be creative. You need to be well rested. You need to have not just sat on Zoom for 8 hours straight to be able to be creative. And so I think what's interesting is this conversation that's emerging, and there's 60 plus case studies in the book, but there's a lot of case studies and new examples of culture and businesses of all different shapes and sizes, civil society, government, through to business, where people are creating small tweaks in their culture, be it that they're shifting the way that they do meetings, they're making them shorter, they're making them stand up, they're taking days where they don't have any meetings in the diary, they're bringing in external, one of the chapters is called Yes and it's about the power of improv and the role that improv can play in business. And so just little ways we can find of injecting playfulness in. And I think what's interesting in selling these stories into leaders who are resistant, you look at the most engaging places to work, whether we're talking about some of the big tech ones like the Googles of the world, whether we're talking about Lego and companies like that. Play is at the heart of their culture. And they've got studies that talk about its benefit to problem solving, to engagement, to NPS scores, you name it. We share some of Jim Collins's work, and he talks about the idea of everywhere you go, making your team kind of the unit of best practice. So even within your sphere of 3 people, 5 people, 50 people, how can you inject some of these ideas into that? And then when people can see that benefit, it starts to become contagious. You're not going to change the culture of an organisation overnight, but you can absolutely influence your sphere of influence and then allow that ripple effect to do exactly that and ripple out.
The book is jam-packed with knowledge on how to lead from the edge, world-class leadership broken down. But what motivated Holly to write it?
Great question. Because two reasons. One, when you do the literature review on leadership, which I've spent the better part of the last year doing, and really a decade's worth of sitting at the feet of interesting people and having the opportunity to interview them, it is overwhelmingly told from the paradigm of like a privileged white male, Navy SEAL, sports coach, or kind of a Jack Welch type business figure. And that is not the leadership that I see driving impact and change. There are definitely leaders that do look like those who are incredible leaders of impact. You will hear about some of them in the book, but it's not the exclusive paradigm and language of leadership. And so there was a real passion for me in that we need to completely change the conversation around leadership. We need to have far more diverse examples, greater gender representation, generational representation, cultural representation. You know, that is in this book. There's equal gender split. There's 20 plus countries featured. There's every sector, every sexual orientation. Like, it's important that we can see that leaders can come in all shapes, sizes, forms, and they can lead and succeed in any context. And so that was one of the real hearts and passions for me in the book, and I hope that's really evident in reading it. I think the second thing is what we started talking about, that for me this starts from a premise that leadership is broken. It is not match fit for the challenges we face in front of us in 2021. And it was not a desire to sit here and go, woe is me, isn't that sad, or how poor is leadership? It was a want to go, but what if? What if we could give everyone the skills and the rallying cry to start a movement of new leadership? And that's for anyone. We're not talking generationally there. I'm not talking about any country. I'm talking about anyone who wants to be the change they want to see in the world and who wants to be stepping up and being the leader that they want to be. And for me, it's really important that that comes with a big asterisk, that there is no presumption around scale there. I don't want anyone to think that this book is about the idea that you've got to go out and run for office or you've got to go run a giant company. It's not. It's actually saying little moments, small moments of leadership are as important as big movements. And all of us need to bring focus to our sphere, our family, our community, our company, our friends, and think about the role that we play as a leader in that circumstance and how we be the best version of ourselves in that. So that was the reasons for writing the book.
I said before that I'm in awe of your career. What do you think you have done to enable that success?
Oh, gosh. Thank you, firstly, because that's a very generous premise to that question. I think probably I would say that it is probably two things. It's curiosity, and it's being really intentional about who I surround myself with in that curiosity. So being really mindful of the diversity of that, but also inherent in curiosity comes with seeking mentors and going out and sourcing influence that can help you grow and develop and find your blind spots and hone your skills and all that sort of stuff. And I think the other thing, and this goes to where we started too around the year of fear, is that preparedness to keep putting myself outside of my comfort zone. Like, writing this book isn't one of the most vulnerable things I've done. It's mildly terrifying, putting that much of yourself out there and as well asking all these people that you deeply admire if they'll have an interview with you so you can share their wisdom. And there's so many aspects of this journey that have been scary, just as so many of the great things that I have done, and I say great in the context of what they've meant for me or how I've grown through them, have been things that when I first thought about them or when I thought to speak them out loud would make me feel like you are, I don't know, like roller coaster style, when you're feeling your stomach rising up through your throat, you know. I think that's a healthy feeling. And I think a lot of us have desensitized from what it's like to feel that. Because when we think about fear, we think about jumping out of a plane or going swimming with sharks or something like that. And we don't actually think about the moments we stop ourselves. And if we can resensitize to those moments where we don't lean in and we can choose to do that, this whole book is based on choosing to do the next brave thing over and over and over. And everyone's got a different definition of brave. And I think it's really important to honor that. Sometimes that's not going with the crowd. Sometimes that's speaking up. Sometimes that's not walking past it. But I think it's an attempt, certainly, and I fall short on certain days, but I keep coming back to it to continue to do the next brave thing over and over.
How fab. That's so exciting. What a great feeling. Okay, well, We have unfortunately run out of time, and so all I can say for now is, Holly, it's been absolutely fantastic, super inspiring. I've loved chatting with you this morning. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so lovely to reconnect, and thank you to everyone who's listened.
Thank you for joining us on Freedom Matters. If you like what you hear, then subscribe on your favourite platform. And until next time, we wish you happy, healthy and productive days.